Kia ora, ko David Hunt toka ingoa. Welcome everybody. My name is David Hunt and I'm part of the team here hosting this workshop today. Thank you for coming. Hopefully you've all had a chance to grab something to eat. And if you haven't, then you're welcome to grab food at the end. What we're going to do today is just take you through, probably I would imagine it's going to take sort of 45 minutes to an hour just to talk through a relatively short presentation, and then we're very happy to take questions either as we go or at the end. I think Rachel has already done the health and safety announcement, so I won't do that again. If everybody's happy, we'll crack into it. One thing just before starting that I really want to emphasise today is that...
It's not the cable.
Well, the picture's coming back up. This is part of we're going to talk about the study that we're doing at the moment, which is part of trying to get a much better handle on what are the opportunities that offshore wind would bring to Taranaki and what are the interest and readiness of workers and organisations in Taranaki to pick up and capture those opportunities. We're not going to find all of the answers today. We're not even going to find all of the answers in the study, but this is a step along a road. Hopefully this will actually take us quite a long way forward and figure out where the remaining gaps are that we want to try and fill in. Thank you, Frank. Before doing anything else, though, I'll just quickly introduce my colleagues who are also going to speak today. Frank Gagan over here and Rachel Holden. And so do buttonhole us at the end if you've got any questions. Right, so I'm going to in a moment talk about the study that's underway, what we're keen to get from you all. We'll talk a little bit about what the offshore wind opportunity is and why it comes about. I'm conscious that some of you will have heard these things before. In fact, some of you have been to a workshop that we had yesterday in Hawera. It was obviously so good that you've come back for more. Either that or we were so bad you didn't understand what we were saying. Not sure which. We've got a survey that hasn't arrived in your inboxes, will be coming shortly. We're very keen for you to fill that out. And as I say, we're happy to cover questions at the end. Just very briefly what this study is about. So Frank, Rachel and I all work for a company called Concept Consulting. You've probably never heard of us. We've got 20 odd years working in the energy industry in New Zealand and offshore. Basically energy was where we began. We do a whole lot of other things now in the telco space, water, climate change issues. We're basically a research company. And we've been hired to do this study to figure out, as I said before, what are the opportunities offshore wind would bring and what is the state of readiness in Taranaki to capture those opportunities. The people who are actually paying us to do the study are Taranaki Offshore Partners, and they, unfortunately, their guy can't be here today. He would have been able to answer questions as well. New Zealand Super Fund, which I'm sure you've heard of, and another co-sponsor is New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. We're also very fortunate in that we've got the support of Araake, who are actually here on the ground for the study as well, and I'm going to ask Jonathan to just briefly talk about Araake and where you fit in.
Sure. Thank you, David. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jonathan Young, taku ingoa. You might remember me from a past life. But I'm now part of the Araake team, and as David said, we're on the ground here in Taranaki. We're very keen to support this kaupapa, very keen to see the opportunities that offshore wind and offshore renewable energy can offer, not just Taranaki, but also the country in its decarbonisation journey. So my role is Head of Policy, Research and Insights. I'm living proof that life exists after politics, and I've been thrilled to be still secured in the energy sector because I was national spokesperson for energy and resources. Was able to get around the country, meet so many different people in the energy space, and see how important it is for our way of life It's like oxygen. It's the air you breathe that you only miss when you can't get a gasp of breath, and energy is the same. So we have a team of 12 people. We have 2.5 FTEs up in Auckland, a person down in Wellington, the rest are based here in New Plymouth. We work right across the energy sector, and the reason why I'm here to welcome you as part of what Concept we're doing is because we want to be accessible to industry here in Taranaki as well. Can I just say, Concept Consulting have a massive reputation. When I was in the energy space and politics, their reports were the gospel of what's happening in the energy sector. And so it's been great to have them involved in this study around industry capability, and I think that you can be confident that you are getting the very best of intelligence and research and understanding about the issues that they are looking at. Just to mention, we have a headquarters in Young Street, and we often run different forums there as well. Some of you have been along to some of them. Every month we run a Taranaki Energy Update, we call it, and we invite as many people as possible to come to that, and we often, well, all the time, we get people to present about what they're doing in their industry in the energy space. And it's part of what we do is this sharing of information, especially when we're involved in such an important transition in our society around energy. It's important to make sure we know what's going on and where it's happening so we can all learn and take advantage of those opportunities. So just a little bit of where we fit, all right, because here we are in Taranaki, New Plymouth. We are the Future Energy Development Centre. We are the national one. We've been created by the government and funded by MB, but we're an independent organisation. So we operate independently, we have our own board, and we work in all sorts of different areas. But in terms of the energy innovation value chain, what we work strongly to do is get energy innovation that's coming out of R&D, universities, Crown Research Institutes, even offshore work in companies, that gets to that point where, okay, we need to get this out into the field, we need to test it and trial it, prototype it, we need to see that it works outside of the lab. You know, labs are often small scale, we need to up the scale, and this is where we fit in. We fit into what's called that valley of death in innovation, that we help people pilot different projects to prove the concept of what they're developing, and also to hopefully connect them to their first customer. And so we work hard in that space. And then you'll see all these different other names under us there, all the different government agencies and private sector and capital, those sorts of places where they operate. Where we operate, it's fairly sparse. So we're one of the few, groups of people or organisations that work into that space to build a bridge from R&D into deployment. We work in three areas, particularly demand-led innovation. We need to find problems before we find solutions. Sometimes these solutions are trying to find a problem. We start with the problems. Then we do demonstration and test beds, and then we create and share new energy knowledge. We have currently about 32 projects and 23 in the pipeline. We are really busy. We are keen to be working hard for New Zealand, and we're really keen to support what's happening here today and to encourage companies to move into this space. If you have any questions, once Concept have completed their work and they're back doing other projects, you can always touch base with us. We are here to support and to assist and to be here for the Taranaki community especially. Thank you very much. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so we will get straight into it. As I said today, the key thing we really want you to do is to participate in the survey. We'll come to that in a moment, but that, more than anything else, that's really what we want, to get information from you. Jonathan touched on the fact that decarbonisation is what's driving a lot of these different initiatives in this study, and just to give a bit of a sense of where offshore wind might fit into things. So offshore wind is essentially much like onshore wind. You can think about it that way. Probably dare say every single person in this room has seen either a wind farm down the coast or in one or two. It began a bit over 30 years ago in Denmark. It's now very well established internationally and growing very quickly, and will be a big part in the world's decarbonisation and in all likelihood in New Zealand's decarbonisation. And just to put a little bit of a sort of sense of scale around it, this is more decarbonisation in New Zealand generally, but as we speak today, there's about 1,000 megawatts of wind capacity on the system. And that capacity has been built over the last 30 odd years or longer, in fact, some of the very early times. By 2035, we need to build that again and again and again. So what took us 30 years, we need to do in the next 13, but we need to do it 3 times. And a lot of that wind energy will be onshore, but there's a very high chance that quite a lot of it's going to be offshore. And the reasons for offshore is that there's more wind, it's a better resource, it's a cleaner resource. You can actually use much more efficient turbines offshore. They have a much higher yield, and then it's partly a size and scale issue, and trying to do those onshore is very difficult, particularly in a country like New Zealand, a very challenging landscape. We've got to straighten a lot of roads and strengthen a lot of bridges. And just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here, these turbines are taller than the Plymouth chimney. And so offshore is really where a lot of the growth is going internationally, because it's much easier to build big stuff if it, it's built close to the water, transported on water, and rested on the water. And the other thing is visuals. A lot of the reason that offshore wind has taken off in the UK is that essentially people don't want to be looking at wind farms onshore, but you build far enough offshore and you basically don't see it. So all of those are reasons why there is a lot of potential, and we're talking very large scale in terms of that potential. I won't say much about this other than that, a sign of that potential is the government's looking very closely at this. They released a document, I can't recall whether it was late last year or early this year, basically trying to figure out what do they need to do to play their part in this, and a lot of that is about trying to create a bit of a policy framework. For those who are interested, we can provide more information, but the government's definitely a part of this. One of the things about the study is that we're trying to make it as concrete as possible, and in order to do that we've used what we call a reference scenario. So this is a hypothetical wind farm that would be built and operating by 2030. It would be 1,000 megawatts in size, so just remember what I said earlier, that's basically in one wind farm all of today's production. So these things are very, very large. Once it's built, that wind farm would be expected to have a life of around 30 years, and in all likelihood would be repowered. And we're starting to see that happening today with some of the very early wind farms coming up for repowering, and there's one in Manawatu that's in the process at the moment. And in this reference scenario, the initial tranche of development is assumed to be 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts, and then expanded to 2 gigawatts. And I should say this is a reference scenario. Part of the reason, 2 reasons we've chosen this particular reference scenario. One is we want it to be concrete and tangible, and the other is that we actually are able to get much better information on this scenario, because it's also one of the potential projects that's being looked at in New Zealand, and it's the one, in fact, that 2 of the sponsors of the study are looking at. As one of the things they're pursuing is New Zealand Super in Copenhagen, the project in the South Taranaki Bight. Talk about a little bit about, I said before, offshore wind is like onshore wind but on the water, that's sort of not telling you anything you didn't already know. But it's important that you have in your heads, it's almost a combination of two industries. It's like onshore wind, but scaled up, very much scaled up. But it's also a marine service industry, because there's a whole lot of logistics, both during construction and in operation, that come because you're working over water and you need to get out to these wind farms. They're not, they're 20 plus kilometres offshore, so there's a bit of travel time, and so there's a whole logistics and marine service aspect of this that becomes very important. And for the reference scenario in this study, we've worked on the assumption that there are in fact two service hubs. So the day-to-day, the routine maintenance would in fact come out of, say, we assumed Patia, which obviously has some quite major potential redevelopment would be required. Patia to be able to take crews out regularly on crew transfer vessels. Talk about that a bit more in a moment. And the reason for Patia is because it's close to the wind farm. You want to minimise the travel time for crews going out each day, subject to weather. But it's not a big port, and there are some items that are very large, and for that you need a large port, and so during the construction phase particularly, but also the phase where periodic every 5 years or so heavy maintenance is required, and we've assumed that would come out of the Plymouth. So it's a combination of the day-to-day servicing and the initial build and then the periodic maintenance from a larger port. And this is very much what we see when we look elsewhere in the world. This is very much, for those familiar with the story that's starting to occur in the ports in Scotland and eastern England, where service hubs, and Grimsby is a classic example of what was a small fishing point that was very much in decline, has now become a major service centre for offshore wind. We'll now talk a bit about the different phases of the development and operations of offshore wind, and for that I'll ask Frank to lead us through.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Yeah, I assume quite a few of you might have already read a lot about the concept of the wind farm from other material that's been published by Janaki and another development in the area. But just recapping for those who are not familiar with this, there's basically three stages to the whole exercise. The development phase, which Copenhagen Auction Partners have started already, which is, if we think around looking at the technical feasibility, the economics, the environmental reports. That little picture there is actually a floating LiDAR that is going to be put 20 miles out on the bight, and that's actually on its way to New Zealand now. It's been purchased, and that'll collect all the net data, sea conditions, subsea turbulence, the whole 9 yards, and wind. It's able to measure wind speed, wind direction, and all the environmental data they need to start feeding the sort of the technical model. So that whole development phase is from now until we get to the sort of decision to construct, and that's at least 3 to 5 years. Following on from that, it will be a very intensive period of 3 to 4 years of construction, which will be mostly done offshore but staged. We anticipate staged out of New Plymouth for delivery of a significant amount of hardware, which will be laid down on port and then pre-assembled and then loaded onto specialist vessels to be taken out to site, and foundation piles, monopiles were hammered in, and then the various elements built with special jack-up rigs and the like. We'll get to that, some more detail on that in a moment. And what we're more interested in, which is the more enduring aspect of jobs, is the 30-year plus O&M phase of the project, where we have to, we've got 60 to 70 individual 15 megawatt turbines sitting out there about 500 metres to a kilometre apart, in an array that's 20 kilometres offshore, and there's a whole infrastructure and organisation to operate that on a day-to-day basis and maintain and service it. So with the next slide. We break that down a little bit further. The ecological environmental studies that are going to be kicking off in the early days, all the usual things that you would attribute to dealing with getting the resource consent and establishing the economics, all the flora and fauna, the seabirds, the whales, the fish, the whole 9 yards of what's the ecological environment look like. So survey of that footprint. And then further down there is the sort of the human aspects, the cultural impact studies, the discussions with Mana Whenua, the visuals, basically all the activities that all feed into the sort of operational model. And then there's the technical stuff where we'll be doing all the geotechnical surveys, seabed topology, this seabed makeup in respect to geotechnical, seismic, everything that's associated with the wind speed, the wind data, what is the economics of the thing going to look like. Then we get to the engineering phase where it's the usual how to build a power station, but this time we're building a power station offshore, which is more akin to the oil and gas aspects of marinising the technology. So basically the engineering design, the scoping and the logistics of getting material on and offshore and out for the construction, again firming up the economics, finalising the consents, and then having an R&D structure ready to go when the project's in operation. And sort of breaking down the construction, so the offshore, but primarily the major components of the turbine will be constructed or will be built offshore and delivered with specialist vessels. They turn up with vessels with the blades, the towers and the turbines. They'll be offloaded at New Plymouth and staged there, so over a period of time all the hardware will get delivered. Then there'll be the installation vessels that will turn up, jack-up rigs, heavy lift cranes. Those vessels will be loaded with 5, 6, 7, 10, depending how it works, 5 to 10 parts for 5 to 10 turbines. That'll then track out to the site. The monopole will already be there from a previous rig. When the weather is right, they'll put the tower up, and then erect the nacelle on the top and install the blades. So that process will go on basically primarily offshore. Underneath all that is an array of cables, so there's going to be an array of cables that are going to connect them all on a network. They're going to be an offshore substation, and then they'll be all coupled together, brought on shore, all on very offshore cables. Again, there has to be cable laying ships, they have to be trenched, they have to be scour protection. So then they're going to be brought ashore to another substation where it's going to be converted to transfer to grid voltage. And in addition to that, is that onshore aspect of transmission is quite significant. There's going to be quite a significant transmission upgrade out of Taranaki to the rest of the grid, which is a totally separate project to this, but a transfer I'll probably run. So there's a huge exercise just to get a gigawatt of electricity off the coast and into the system. Secondary issues, port development. The port will have to be significantly expanded. We're doing a study at the moment to look at the extent land area required and what's required for manoeuvring the various vessels that will be needed. Then there's the usual onshore things like that part here. For example, there have to be a smaller port there for it's a river, basically a river port, shallow, different vessels for basically carrying personnel to and from an operational base that will be there, warehousing, office staff, maintenance staff, marine coordination, diesel bunkering for vessels. And then over on top of that, there's a whole project management and logistics for coordinating all of this through the construction phase, through the build, and then on to personnel for a full-blown power station operation for 30 years. So then we get to the operational phase, which we're particularly interested in, because this is a long-term enduring, this is a 30-year exercise, which we have researched various projects around the world to ascertain how many people are required and what sort of jobs are required. This is where most of you folks will come in. This is the build will come and go. This is the long-term enduring job creation exercise that we're trying to get quantified. We want your information about what you can provide. So it's just basically an operational chart for a regular power station, except it's got this offshore aspect. So there's always the operational aspects of power stations that we know and love, you know, dispatching to the market and monitoring them more remotely. But with an offshore, we have the offshore logistics of several crew transfer vessels, weather coordination, you know, longer term 5-year major maintenance where we have to get significant other vessels in from overseas with heavy lift and crane, more like the oil and gas where you're doing a well worker and other specialist vessels in, and then all the onshore logistics of warehousing and having the maintenance and from staff and business opportunities. Then on top of that is there's the external stuff that we're not going to employ, but we're going to need. We're going to need the likes of helicopter services, refuelling, transport and logistics to bring stuff from New Plymouth, diving services, coding specialists, non-destructive testing personnel, and all the statutory inspections that have to be done. All these services will be contracted in over time, and then. Yes, every 5 years there's a major maintenance exercise where there might be generators will change out, blades repaired. And then there's the indirect jobs of hospitality. So everybody's got to eat, the medical services, get the haircut, everybody has a general services. So we're trying to quantify those. So, so when it comes down to the number of jobs actually on the day-to-day operations, it's about 60 full-time equivalents engaged in the project from operations, marine coordination, onshore logistics, maintenance services and back office support. So all this material is available, we're going to provide it to you. And when we get to the, we sort of add all that up, we talk about in 3 tiers. There's a 60 equivalent jobs directly employed. Now that 60 FTEs, that's 2,000 man years of labour, plus another 50, which is about 50 of support services, whether it's saying helicopters, divers, whatever, transport, warehousing, waste management, landscaping, painting, coding services, stuff that will be contracted in. There's another 50 FTEs. And then on top of that, there's all the accommodation, additional food supplies, medical support, safety training, probably be peer to. So when you add all that up, there's 4,000 man years of opportunities here. And today's exercise is to get you to tell us which bin you feel like you can provide a service in. So who we've got next. So to get a much better idea of the jobs, the descriptions of each of those jobs, we went to Copenhagen Offshore Partners developing an analogous project in Victoria. So offshore Victoria, they're doing a project called Star of the South, and again they have gone into some depth to produce job descriptions. As an example of one here, job descriptions for all the people they need in all 3 phases. So this is the way. There's a link to this on what we're going to send you. So they've worked out all their job types for the development, construction, and then the operations and the blue phase. And then there's a detailed description of the qualifications required, experience, skill, knowledge levels, everything you need to qualify for that particular position. And we will, you can peruse this later on, but it's a rather extensive list. That is where we are at the moment. So maybe I'll hand over to Rachel now, which will discuss what we like to get from you. So,
thanks, Frank. So as David mentioned earlier, and I think Frank did as well, we have got a survey that we're keen for organisations, companies in the Taranaki area and New Zealand more broadly to fill out, so that we can get an idea of the local capability and interest to provide the components and the services that are needed for an offshore wind industry. So I have sent that survey, I've emailed it to the email addresses that you used to register for today. I sent it about half an hour ago. If you haven't received it, or you want me to send it to a different email address, please come and talk to me afterwards and we can sort that out. Right, so here is an example of what the survey looks at. So basically there's a whole lot of categories on there that we go through, and you can tick yes to any that apply to you. If you say yes, then we will ask you how ready you are to provide that service or component. So it may be something that you can already provide. For example, if you are a helicopter business, you may already be completely ready to provide helicopter services. For some others, you may need to do some training, or you may need to do a little bit of an investment in tools to be able to provide the service, but you may say that you have limited readiness, or you've got moderate readiness. So it's just to get some kind of idea about how ready whether you could turn around and do it tomorrow, assuming you had some capacity, or whether you would need a few years to get ready, which is perfectly fine, because this is a long-term project, and operations won't be starting until about 2030. Should we go on to the next slide? Right, so this information is also, these links are also in the email that I've sent you. You may want to have a little bit more of a read before you fill out the survey, because you may be a bit unsure whether what exactly it is that we're asking you for. Now, one of these links this is the UK one, is it? Yeah. So this guide here will give you quite a good idea of all the different components that are needed for an offshore wind farm. So if you're a company that you think you may be providing some bits that are necessary, then this is probably a good place to look, just to kind of see what kind of things would be needed, and whether that's an area that you can work in or can expand to work in. One of the links that we'll also send you is a jobs guide, which is, the jobs guide is for the Star of the South project that Frank mentioned. He'll get it up in a minute. So that's the offshore wind farm that's been developed in Victoria, Australia. This jobs guide basically shows you what kind of skills you need, what training you would need to do particular jobs as part of that.
It's on the side. We'll get that
Sorry. There is a link in the email that I've sent you. We are looking, the qualifications in that guide are Australian-based qualifications. We are looking at whether we can do something New Zealand-based. There will be some cases where the qualifications are the same, but it will give you a good idea of whether you have the expertise to work in these areas, or whether you can do a little bit more training to work in these areas. So yes, you can look at the email for that. What's the next? So yeah, basically open for questions now for any of us to answer. We're also happy to talk to you afterwards as well.
Any closing statements? No? Q&A.
No questions?
Yeah, one is probably a collective one. In terms of O&M, like we've experienced some of New Zealand's onshore.
Yeah, just stand up. Go
Oh. Some of New Zealand's onshore wind farms O&M have been participated from the primary contractors or primary suppliers like Vestas or Siemens, and guys like us don't really have a chance to get into providing their service. Either that or we have to climb through a whole bunch of hoops to satisfy them. So my question is Copenhagen participating in this to secure New Zealand private entities or people to have that opportunity, or is the likelihood of another provider coming in to?
You want to take that?
You start and I'll finish. How's that?
The reality is it'll be a combo. I mean, they primarily have a long-term warranty agreement with the supplier, but we're very early days and nothing's decided. So I mean, part of this exercise, when setting the whole thing up, is where do they make that split between what they want to contract from the original equipment provider, which they will have people on site for 3 or 4 years, just to look after the fact that they've got a warranty on a $1 billion project. So they are not going to. There's no defined cut between the hands on the tools that you can get involved with those suppliers to be there. And you see jumping through hoops. So we want you to jump through hoops to be qualified to operate. The owner of the plant will want qualified personnel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's no reason why they can't be local. Part of this exercise is to present to them, look, we have a whole industry that's sitting here ready to be retrained. Why do you have to bring in overseas technicians, right? So there's no real reason why we can't support it here. It just, you have to be, but if you leave it too late and the things are turning up, then they're going to import everybody. So this part of this exercise is to get Taranaki ready to say that we are qualified. That big job list I put up there, we can provide all these people. We can train them all here. We put them through the right schooling now. People that are in school now will be getting these jobs, be in a position to decide where the future is. Yeah, I don't know if that sort of covers it.
Yeah, definitely. Plus,
There was a question like at the back.
Yeah, you spoke a bit about I thought I heard you say that you're talking about mainly jobs for O&M phase, not necessarily the development and construction phase. When you talk about 4,000 man years, is that 3 phases or just the O&M?
That is primarily the O&M phase. It's a bit vague.
Because
We've
the
got.
website talks about 2,000 jobs during the construction phase. That's what's kind of put out there on the website. So I was just wondering, and a lot of the jobs that are listed in the link you sent are for the construction phase. So I'm just curious about how that's been factored. You can talk around that.
Yep. So for the O&M phase, we know that it's about 2,000 jobs, and the construction phase is a similar thing over 3 or 4 years. So I've seen several reports that from overseas projects that put those numbers, quite a range of those numbers for construction, but there's going to be another 2,000 man years to build the thing. It's condensed into about 4 years. And from now till it starts operation, there's another tranche of specialists that will come and go from now to when we hand over to operations. And then with 60 people for 30 years, it's basically 2,000 man years. So I don't know if you have a better take on that.
No, I endorse what Frank said, but happy to, curious when you say the website, I'm not sure which.
Oh, the Taranaki Offshore Partnership.
Oh, right, yeah. I think you'll find that is only talking about the construction phase. Does it? Okay. Oh, well, we should double check the site. Maybe, yeah, we should, because we may have slightly different numbers, but I think the real, as Frank says, the key point is that there's a big surge in jobs, but in the construction phase, some onshore, some offshore, but those jobs are really about building it, and then there's 30 years where there's a lower number of jobs, but they're permanent and ongoing. There's another question at the back.
Sorry, I'm late, so I may have missed some content when I did come late. My name's Brad Tisby. I'm Managing Director of a company called 40S Group in New Plymouth, and we specialise in stakeholder consultation. Now, I've just got a question in regards to where this offshore wind farm is being proposed to go, and who holds the leases on those areas. If you could answer that, would be great.
Yeah, well, the short answer is I can't answer your question simply because there are no leases. There's no, it may have come up while you were out, but there is no ability to build offshore wind in New Zealand because there is no framework. And there are discussions going on at the moment between government and iwi and developers and communities about what sort of framework would make sense. So that's a space that would need to be filled in. It's not part of our work, but we're very much aware that that's a canvas that would need to be painted in.
Thank you. It's very important.
Yeah, agree. Question from the front here.
It's all very rosy what you're talking about. Is this going to end up another fiasco like the offshore mining, and there'll be so many ifs and buts thrown at it that it just disappears again?
Well, I can understand the scepticism or the caution. We'll be completely honest, this is not 100% like, lay down misère. Building one of these things, there's a whole lot of things that has to happen beforehand. The question we just had a moment ago highlighted one of those things is there's a whole, kind of framework that doesn't exist today. Other countries have developed those frameworks. Australia is a couple of years ahead of New Zealand on that, so that would need to be done. There's a whole bunch of other what-ifs that need to be sorted out, working with iwi, other stakeholders. So I can't tell you it's 100%. What I can tell you, though, is what I said earlier. New Zealand is very much set on a path to decarbonisation. That'll take a long time, my own personal view. But to achieve that, we need a lot more renewables, and you can't help but look at the opportunity in offshore wind and think, if you've got to do 4 times today's wind farms, this looks like it will be a very strong contender in that space.
But you're still going to be at the mercy of all the nitpickers that are going to throw everything at you while you can't. Is there a position offshore that they can't stall you, i.e. you go further out, or is that not possible? Because you're going to get going on what has happened around, especially offshore. There's just too much, to put it bluntly, shit being thrown in. So can you avoid that by going further out and say,
That's under 12 mile, will it?
Yeah.
200.
is there an option?
Well, I think probably laying a cable to Australia would be the realistic option. I think there's a danger of getting into very controversial territory here. So, not part of our study. What I would say again, wearing my personal hat, there are a lot of different interests, and I think legitimate interests to try and figure out solutions. What I would say though is there's a big opportunity here, and I think there's a lot of goodwill, certainly in the discussions that we've been privileged to take part in. But there's an awful lot of things yet to sort out. So, but I think there is a lot of goodwill, a lot of discussions going on.
I dare say there's some lessons learned from what we've talked about. There's been some lessons learned from that exercise.
Certainly hope so.
Sorry,
Sorry, just answering that man and Brad a little bit. We do know from other conferences that the government is developing the New Zealand Offshore Wind Farms Act at the moment. So we've got rules and regulations in place, and probably
2024.
Yeah, end of 2024, and now's probably the time to lobby those people who are in campaign for what we want and what we want to do to get it set in stone and made part of the act, basically. Thanks.
Chris, a question over.
A question about particularly towards the survey when we go to answer it. So obviously there's construction phase, but I'm assuming that you'll need some aspects of O&M the second the first turbine is up and running. So is that you're kind of looking at a meshed approach to that, or is it until construction is fully complete?
It's not a hard cutover. An O&M structure will be in place 12 months before the first. You'll be recruiting O&M staff 12 months before the first turbine's in. But conceptually into place, so that you have the ability to operate and maintain them as they go in. Right. So it's not a hard cutover. So it's a bit more illustrative than reality. Good question.
Kia ora, my name's Maya. 2 questions. Where will these be fabricated? Which country? And how are they currently decommissioned?
We find others too. The short answer is we don't know where they'll be fabricated, but we think because there's no, it's too early in the process to know. I think in all likelihood though, given the very specialised nature of these machines, a lot of them will be built offshore. Things like building blades, they've now become so specialised that there's only a few factories in the world that make them. They're so big and so high tech. It doesn't mean to say though that there aren't components that can be built here. I mean, you need ladders to actually get up these things. There's, I see outside here galvanised, decking. Now, whether those sorts of things will be part of this, again, too early to say, but part of the survey is really to try and understand what componentry might be able to be made here. But things like the very high tech specialised stuff, realistically, probably not. That was your first question. The second one was about decommissioning. I'm not sure what actually.
They'll be so redundant after 30 years they'll be taken down and another whole turbine will probably be put up. So they'll be taken down and the steel will be recycled. So I can't. That's 30 years away. So what's the technology going to be like in 30 years? Will they repower what goes on top of the existing plant with the same size? Probably not, because there'll probably be new technology, or they might just repower it with exactly what they've got. We just can't tell from yet. But it's a reverse operation of putting it up. If they were to be taken away entirely, which is probably unlikely, they would be dismantled and the piles pulled out and cables pulled out and taken away and recycled.
Yeah, certainly there are some of the very oldest wind farms are now in that stage where repowering is starting to occur in Europe. And my understanding is as Frank says, the metals are being recycled, so the copper and steel and the rest. Some of the earlier machines, the blades, difficult to recycle, but I believe that some of the manufacturers now are actually producing blading materials that can be recycled as well. And certainly what we're talking about by the time these development occurs in New Zealand, I think that would be very much part of the thinking of the life cycle.
Have you pursued power purchase agreements or anything like that yet? Because we talk about supplying skills for this side, but there's also where the power goes. That will also need people.
In terms of thinking about the jobs side of it, we've included, if you like, the thinking of, as Frank said earlier, in the operation and maintenance phase, there is provision for the selling of the output. But in terms of actually what sort of power purchase agreements might be required, no, that's not part of the study that we're looking at.
So target industries or anything like that?
No, we're not. That's not part of the study.
Does the study look at where the next 2 gigawatts of capacity might go?
Only in as much as the reference case includes potential expansion gigawatts, but no, we've simply done that because it will be broadly scalable, we think, so you can people can work it out. It won't be absolutely linear, but things like port development, but it should be broadly scalable in terms of the OEM. Question?
Yeah, Tony Parr, the Harbour Master at Port Taranaki. You mentioned there were 2 ports of entry, there's New Plymouth and Partia, and that there was work going on at the moment to see about New Plymouth's capabilities and limitations as a port to support this enterprise. What about Partia? It's going to be used a bit differently, obviously, but once upon a time back in the day, there were the meatworks there, and that port was navigable. So it's a notorious river bar there at the moment, and only used by the brave on a good day, coming and going. So what sort of work will you be doing there to ensure that Partia is going to be a navigable port?
Yeah, so certainly as part of our study, we're not looking at that in detail, but we're aware that that is certainly an issue that's on the radar screen for Copenhagen and New Zealand Super, and I believe they've done some preliminary work to at least establish that it's a workable option.
There's been a pre-feasibility study done on a desktop study done on it, but that will be, they'll grind a lot finer on that for sure.
as you say, it's a very challenging port, so all the offshore data has been gathered, the wave data, and it's been sent to people that have been looked at ports overseas. But yeah, we're not front of house on that particular study, but we have taken some of their information to feed some numbers for our report. But yeah, a challenging exercise. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, thank you. A gigawatt is really going to stretch the grid today, and several others lining up. Do your numbers also take into account FTEs associated with making the grid bigger?
No, short answer is no. So there's, again, that's something we're going to try and at least identify in qualitative terms, but we may not, as part of this study at least, be able to put FTE numbers on it. But question for Patia, if Patia was to be redeveloped, there's a construction project, as you say, there's grid expansion. There's a whole bunch of things that flow from this. But we're really trying to get more of a direct impact and then identify some of those flow-on impacts.
But you're right, it's a significant exercise on grid upgrade. It depends on how many projects are on the cards for the area, and how it's going to be dispatched, when it's going to be dispatched, what's going to be taken out of service. TCC disappears, so there's a whole equation that Transpower are mulling over, and we believe the two are going to go together.
Another question for you, construction phase. If these were phased with 500 megawatt fields and you were going to do one and then phase and phase and phase, which I understand is potentially an option, you're going to have quite an elongated construction phase. Are you also looking at the capability of bringing resource to New Zealand, given that offshore wind is going gangbusters all over the world? And are you actually looking at whether you can secure resources here, or alternatively, trying to build in New Zealand because you have the time frame to try and achieve that?
Good question. Well, this sort of feeds into that. No, we don't have the keen answer to that. But this sort of survey and what we're doing now feeds into that. Because you're right, we could be in the end of a very long queue down at the bottom of the world. But right now it's all coming out of Europe, but now a lot of it's coming out of Taiwan. So we're not actually that far from in the future. There's a lot of development. That curve you've seen before, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There will be more development.
Yeah, phasing of Australia.
Yeah, but I mean, where they're manufactured and more likely be Asia in the future for this end of the world, and then we'll be piggybacking off what's happening in Australia for sure. So when it comes to Australia, the Tasman, the two are facing each other across the Tasman. So there's going to be some synergies between two projects down this end of the world for the long-term maintenance and the building, whether they're able to secure resources. That's something we can't really put our hand to tell you all about right now. But this is where Copenhagen offshore partners who do this for a living would be, and they're not here, sorry. Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm just wondering to what extent their Transpower needs to upgrade their infrastructure, because one thing was probably the new substation improvements. Are you guys typically talking to Transpower?
They are well aware of this, and it's on their list of opportunities, so they know. So it's a big equation, because it's like this 400 megawatts are going to come out of Taranaki. TCC's coming out of service in time. These things will come in service. So there's a net export that I can't tell you what it is now, because there's other projects that will be coming on, be applying for connections as well. So yes, Transpower are well aware of it, and that's what they do for a living. And we can't really tell you much more about it right now, but what we can tell you is they're talking to them.
Has your study looked at where the redundancy in the labour will be for the local staff. So, such as if you have an offshore rig that deals with the catering and the accommodation, and you start with contractors. If you looked at where the contractors become redundant, where they then decide that we could just employ our own staff, or buy our own gear and skill and labour to carry on with the O&M.
Yeah, if I'm understanding your question, saying the looked at where.
I'll repeat it. So you use our local skill and materials to build this place. That's cool. But at what stage, does the central body that runs this decide, okay, we don't need you anymore, we're going to just employ our own staff? Has that been looked at when in the process that would be? Or is it permanently going to be engaging contractors to run this offshore wind farm?
I think that org chart we put up, the anticipation is that org chart is a permanent. So the anticipation is that org chart is permanent staff. That's not, and that's augmented by a series of contractors.
Yep.
So that is a proposed structure we're trying to study if that works. So we're trying to find out we're putting up what we expect we need for the R&M phase, and there's an understanding of what support services are needed. So we anticipate that most of Tier 2 are local contracts, and they should be enduring. I mean, if the local contractor performs the requirements, then they will be in the process for renewing those contracts, and they may well be long-term contracts. Can't tell right now, but that would be the ideal outcome. There is a service industry developed in. We're not going to be the only, this particular farm model is not going to be the only one in town. So, in an ideal world, those contractors would have enough work across several wind farms to support investment in the plant and equipment and staff.
Any other questions? Take questions, or if you want to hold us privately at the end, just grab something else to eat. Another question here.
Time frames, based on your knowledge, if you're looking at the R&M phase, when would you be saying to people, because you're asking us to understand what our capability will be like in the future, potentially. Do you have a date for that future?
I think we can work backwards from that chart to get Frank to give you a specific answer. It's all a little bit fluid, but we've got 5 days, so maybe you can.
Yeah, I think we target this commissioning by 2030. You can sort of work back from that based on these sorts of dates. That's the best we can do right now. I mean, there's a lot of water to go under the turbine before we can make a decision on when and where, and a huge amount of pieces of this jigsaw to get in place to get to the final investment decision on this. So that's the best we can give you at the moment. Plus or minus around 2030.
Thank you.
Last one for me. Is there a genuine risk that development would commence at a point in time, perhaps 2030, 2032 sort of range? Will that occur at a point once a lot of the oil and gas labour has left town? So now to bring back helos, to bring back offshore workers, it gets harder and harder at that point. So there must be an overlap somewhere for a seamless transition here. Is that a risk you guys have cited?
Yeah, well, it's not part of our study. We're not trying to forecast the future for oil and gas. So we probably, share our own private views. But
Yes, I mean, there is probably a risk, yes. If oil and gas decline before wind can get up, that could be an outcome.
Yeah. But, I think, so you can't say there's no risk because things like that can happen. But I guess being able to see that coming is, that's something you can try and manage your work, obviously. And I'm trying to remember when, the existing permits have got quite a long time to run, so you would expect that people are going to produce those to the point where they're no longer economic. Now, what that date is, there will be lots of different views about, but I suspect that's not 30.
Yeah. You mentioned competing operators out in that space. Is it going to be a race to get the first one stood up and then the other one squashed, or is there room for everybody out there?
I think those are questions that are beyond, in all honesty, beyond our study.
There's a lot of acreage out there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the permitting regime that the government's working on. But
Well,
it's just,
are you talking about only developers or wind developers?
Wind developers.
I see, wind developers. Oh, yeah, yeah.
well, I mean, the government's trying to develop a regime where you, like an oil and gas permit, there's an area which you get allocated to develop to a certain phase, and then if you pass a feasibility test, you'll get the rights to carry on. So it's the way the Australian model works. If met out of a seabed, you've got so many years to get to a certain feasibility stage, show your credentials, and then as you put more and more into the development, you'll secure more and more of those rights, where you are not wasting your money by doing your all this research and all this LiDAR work sitting on top of the seabed that someone else is going to be able to swoop in and get an issue, withdraw, or your permit expires.
Yes.
And that's just a sort of general concept.
And
I understand it's happening.
The follow-on from that is if there's going to be multiples of this size wind farm out there, have you equated in the extra port land required and service requirements for competing kind of bids for the space?
Well, I mean, that's the way it is today. For building any power station,
yeah,
anybody can be one down the road, and resources can get tight.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would add is that I suspect you're not going to see two equal, mega projects occurring commissioning in the same year. It's going to be more likely to be phased because of capacity issues in terms of building as well as the demand side of things as well. So, but again, that's a whole lot of stuff has to be worked out. You can pretty much guarantee the first one will be the hardest. Unless there are any other questions for us at this point, then that probably just remains for me to thank you all for coming along today. Do stay and have something more to eat if you've got time, and ask any questions if you want to get us one-on-one. Can I please ask, do fill in the survey? We're really keen. We know it's not going to answer every question for us, so we're not trying to kind of get every bit of knowledge in one go, but it will nonetheless give us quite a big step forward, we believe, in terms of what we're trying to do for the study. Thank you very much for coming along.